Hey, what's going on? You there? Are you listening? It's another episode of Film Streak. My name is Rob. What we're doing is talking about some new movies. And these aren't new releases. Obviously, none of these are going to be new releases, but they're new films to me. They're new films that I'm kind of going through this era of discovery and my film watching, my film going, right? And sometimes it's a matter of learning about a new genre or a new era in filmmaking. This episode, I really want to break down a filmmaker and some of their work, and especially because it relates to a documentary I talked about in a previous episode, a documentary called De Palma that is about Brian De Palma and all of his work, right? His total body of work as a filmmaker from his beginnings up to the most recent film. And what I found curious about that documentary is he didn't talk about the most recent film. That would be Domino from 2019. And as far as I can tell, that is the last film he has worked on, but I had never seen it, so I wanted to check it out. And also that documentary, it reminded me or kind of made me more aware that there were a lot of films that he had made over the years that I just somehow never saw. And so I decided, all right, let's go back. Let's go see what we missed, you know? And so that I felt like maybe a good point to start with, based on the documentary and how he talked about this film, was Sisters from 1972. This is a film that, for a young filmmaker, not necessarily a first-time filmmaker, but someone who's really establishing their style, their voice, and the types of story they want to tell. Like, this one is kind of out there, you know? If you've not seen the film, I mean, it's 1972, so we're talking about over 50 years ago now, but it's sort of disturbing, right? And yet it works in elements of things that, of course, today we have better understanding of, and there's not anything to honestly really be scared of. But I could imagine at the time, like, these were things that people didn't talk about or you didn't really understand or know. And so it was prime material for making something of a thriller, of a horror film out of. And that is, we got Margot Kidder in this, who I only really know from the Superman films of the 80s, being Lois Lane, and the Black Christmas theme horror movie, which I think I talked about in an early episode of Film Streak, maybe a couple years ago now at this point. But that's really all the awareness I had of Margot Kidder as a performer, like of her work. I just didn't know her to any degree beyond that. And so to watch this film and to see her really do some different things in this, and one just having this accent, if I remember right, I think it's a French accent, and she plays twins. She plays two different characters, but there's a moment, there's a sort of a reveal in the film that, oh, there's two of them. I think the thing that is probably more shocking than the fact that she's playing twins, or two roles even, is that the twins were formerly conjoined twins. And the links that this film goes to illustrate or to convey, I guess, how weird or creepy or gross the idea of conjoined twins is. It's one of those things, I don't know, has sensibility changed about this kind of thing? Do we understand, like, conjoined twins, they're not people that we ignore or we hide in closets and all that kind of thing. Like, they're people like anybody else, but there's just different circumstances they have to deal with, unfortunately. I don't know. I, I try to watch a film like this and I try to not think too much about what I'm feeling or experiencing watching it today. I try to watch it in the eyes of someone when the film was released. I think that's important. It's not always possible. Sometimes things are so kind of egregious or questionable. It's like you can't help but realize your current sensibility or contemporary culture even that's around us right now, sometimes it can't help but overwhelm what you're feeling as you're watching an older film. And so this one, it doesn't take long to kind of move past the fact that, oh, this is a thing about conjoined twins and look at how weird they are. And isn't this scary and creepy and gross? And it doesn't really play anymore, I think. So once you kind of get over that, which maybe in 1972, it took you a lot of time to do that, there is this other kind of thriller element to it where we have another one of our characters who witnesses Margot Kidder's, she plays Dominique and Danielle, right? These two sisters. One of the sisters kills a man that she brings home for the evening, right? They kind of hook up, do their thing, and then she kills the guy. A neighbor across the way happens to see all this through the window. And so from there, you get elements of Hitchcock, because you have a sort of Rear Window-esque type of thing unfolding, right? She thinks she saw a murder. She gets the police involved. She goes there. She starts digging into this story, and turns out there's no evidence. There's nothing to suggest there was an actual murder. And how is that possible? And so that's where this film kind of takes us down that road of, what are you really seeing? And can you believe what you've seen? And did you even see what you think you saw? I guess in that respect, it kind of works in that it takes you for that ride. It takes you on that journey. But the other side of it is that I think this film is more about establishing De Palma as a filmmaker. It's one of those things that I think if you don't know, like if Brian De Palma had made this film and never made another film, you could look at this and say, oh man, what happened to this guy? This guy was on to something. Like he was starting to find a style, starting to make, like you could see the sort of signature types of choices that would come in his later films. You could see the beginnings of that in this. I remember talking to some friends a long time ago in an old podcast I used to do. We were talking about Paul Thomas Anderson's Hard Eight, his first feature. And if you've ever seen that film, hey, congratulations, good job, because I feel like not enough people have seen that film. And so much is happening in that. And it's a film that it has a special place in my heart, I guess, in my mind. But the other side of it is when you see that film and you see hints of what he's doing with his writing, with his dialogue, you see hints of what he's doing with his camera work and the editing and the structure of his story. And then you see films that come later and you're like, oh, that was there the whole time. Maybe he didn't quite figure it out. It wasn't maybe as polished yet, or he hadn't really kind of refined it yet, but it was there. And so this is one of those films that I guess in hindsight, sure. But even at the time, I feel like you could say, wow, here's somebody who's really doing something different. And what are they going to do next? Like what other choices could this filmmaker make? And in that respect, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting. I can't really say I enjoyed it entirely. I had to kind of break away from it at some point and look at it maybe a little more intellectually, because I think the horror of it didn't really work. It didn't last very long, I'll give it this much. I just felt like I saw a different side of Margot Kidder as a performer, and the kind of, I don't know, commitment is the word, but the kind of depth that she was able to go to and give us a couple of different characters, a couple of different angles for this story. I don't know. I thought it was interesting, you know? After that, after watching Sisters, I said, all right, what's the next film? Because there's clearly going to be a step up, right? So I said, all right, what's the next film that I hadn't seen from Brian De Palma that I really felt like, all right, this is in my lane and this is probably something that'll interest me, right? Plus, from the documentary, he tells a very interesting story. He has a very interesting perspective on the making of this film. And if you're into the behind the scenes stuff, that's already intriguing enough. But I said, all right, let me see what this is about. Obsession from 1976. The lead, the star of this film is Cliff Robertson. And I think to most modern audiences, to people of a certain age or generation, they know him as Uncle Ben from the Spider-Man trilogy, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, right? That was your Uncle Ben. And I got to say, aside from that, honestly, even though I'm older than that generation, I can't think of what I know Cliff Robertson from. Like, I know I've seen him in films. I know I've seen him maybe in TV shows. I know I've seen him in things. He's kind of been just present, like one of those guys. And here being the star, I don't know. This sounds so bad. I don't know why. This character, he plays a successful New Orleans businessman, and the film starts in 1959. We see him, his wife and daughter are kidnapped one night. And there's this plot to for ransom or whatever. And he tries to get one over on the kidnappers and get his family back. And it all goes wrong, right? They end up getting killed. And you're like, whoa, that's like a movie by itself. And that's only like the first act, or not even the first act. It happens really fast. It's like condensed down, like all this stuff happening. And so then the film kind of pushes forward. We jump to 1975. And here we see this character, his name is Michael. He takes a trip to Italy with a friend of his. And if I remember right, I think it's like a business trip. So he's there on actual business, but he goes to this old church where he met his wife, back, years ago. And as he's at this church, he meets a young woman there named Sandra who looks just like his wife. Of course, for the film, it's the same actress, Genevieve Bujold, right? Now, that already, that's its own film. So I guess you have to show one part of this character's life to understand the second part of his life and what this means to him. I got you. But then the idea of him kind of finding this, that's the title of the film. He finds himself in this strange, like obsessive kind of this pattern of just behavior that, I don't know. I don't want to say it's a bad film, but I think a lot of this, and honestly, hearing Brian De Palma's side of making this film, it kind of starts to make sense. It's like Cliff Robertson just isn't doing it in this movie. He's not bringing something to the game. And I don't know what it is, but it just feels very kind of phoned in. And you could say, well, maybe that's this character just not being able to deal with his emotions or his past. But I don't know. Maybe Maybe that's unfortunately I was kind of maybe tainted by watching that documentary and hearing that side of the filmmaking process. Not here trying to badmouth anybody, of course, but like, bro, Cliff Robertson, you gotta. I know he's passed, R.I.P., rest in peace, and all that, but he just seemed like a guy that just had a perpetually bad hair day. Never could get it together, huh? Just like a hairdresser, a hairstylist. Get something going, throw some conditioner in it. It just really never a film I've seen him in with like a nice, finely coiffed head of hair. Just wasn't meant to be, I guess. And so, I don't think the film falls apart because of him, but I think he doesn't help it. And it's not even to say I think the film falls apart. I just think it's not particularly strong. Like, it just doesn't really move the needle a lot, And I get the idea, though. And I like the idea of seeing a man or a character confronting some things about themselves, about the past, and about their connection to another person, and seeing it from two different points in time. That's something that I just have a fascination with, that of either looking forward or looking back and comparing and finding the connections between the past and the present, or even the future, right? It's just a very fascinating sort of way to tell a story to me. And I thought this film might do some of that. And it kind of gets into some of that, but I just feel like it's flat. Like it has no energy to it. Just kind of lays there. Now, I'll say this. I'm not real up on Genevieve Bujold, so I don't really know a lot of her work. And maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe I should be. I think she's a thing, of course. This film, watching her in this, as his wife in the earlier part of his life, I don't even think she has any dialogue. She's just kind of there. And it's mostly implied or shown from his point of view as like he loves her, he cherishes her, and he values her. But we really don't get a sense of her. But when we move to 1975 and we meet Sandra, also played by her, that's where I feel like, oh, now we're seeing somebody who is a personality, has a real character. And so I feel like, well, that's where you could see where Michael would be taken with that, right? Would be overwhelmed by that and become obsessive about it. And what does it mean? And what should he do? And yet, like I said, I just think, I don't know if it's a performance thing. I don't know if it's a writing thing, but it never really gets there. So I said, all right, well, not really having a lot of luck with these so far, but let me move on. Let me keep pushing forward. Let me see what else is out there from De Palma that I've just never gotten around to. And so the next film was The Fury from 1978. And this is a film that is very different. This is where I think we kind of get out of the subtextual kind of just outside of our reach concepts and ideas, and we make it more overt, right? I think here is where we see De Palma really go for it. Just take a big swing. He's made bold choices and really started to define a style. But in The Fury, because here's where we go supernatural, basically. It starts out as kind of a rather standard film or even kind of a thriller in a way. We've got, we're set in the Middle East, 1977. We've got Kirk Douglas. He's on vacation with his grown son, and gunmen show up on the beach, and they just start killing people, and they kill Kirk Douglas. And for me, watching the film, I'm like, what are you doing? How do you kill the biggest movie star in this film, like within the first 15 minutes? What? And as the film keeps going, we realize, or it's revealed that this was staged. This was a ruse. This was all serving some other purpose. And they basically take his son and they start experimenting on him and forcing him into a new life, thinking his father was killed. Why though? Why would they do that, right? Because they think your boy has got supernatural skills. He's got the telekinesis. Well, the point is, though, is they take him and they pretty much hide him away. And in the meantime, Kirk Douglas, who was not actually killed, is trying to find his son now. And he's on this mission. He's kind of this spy / investigator / badass who's trying to find his son. And doing that, he meets this young girl who also has her own superpowers, right? She's got these mind control powers or whatever you call it. And here's where we start to see like a whole new story, basically. It's kind of like a different movie now because she kind of becomes the main character in a way. That's Amy Irving, who De Palma also worked with in Carrie. But here, she's very much the young girl who's just kind of lost in this situation, kind of gets caught up in it all. And I think, there's something about this kind of film that it starts as one thing and then it turns into something else very different that I think is interesting. I think it can be fun. But at the same time, I think if you don't really thread that needle, I don't know if it's entirely enjoyable, you know? And so it's tricky. And this film, especially, I don't really think it works. I talked about this in a previous episode also, but, Kirk Douglas, seeing him in a film with some of these other actors, it's real clear of like, we're in different movies. It's their acting style, their presence. It's just something so striking, the contrast. And it's not to say it doesn't serve its purpose in the right kind of story, in the right kind of film, but I don't know. This one's, honestly, it just feels messy. If you had to like back up and really kind of summarize it in a way, it just kind of feels messy. And it's not about the technique. It's not about the style of it. Because I think here we see De Palma really refine and build on some of the tricks in his toolbox. But I think it's more about the story itself. Like the skeleton of this thing is just kind of janky, you know? And so you can dress it up as much as you want, but I think it's kind of uneven. These films, I feel like for me, they flew under the radar. And now that I've seen them and in the context of De Palma's other films, I kind of understand why they're not talked about as much. So look, that was some of his films from the 70s. I did want to get to some of his newer films after the peak of The Untouchables and Mission Impossible and Carlito's Way and all that, right? Like there is a sense of like, oh, we're going downhill. Like there's a point where people really kind of just didn't rock with De Palma no more for whatever reason. So we fast forward here. Let me jump forward to 1998, right? We're going to move up 20 years to Snake Eyes. And it's Nicolas Cage, Gary Sinise, Carla Gugino, who I feel like has been around for a long time, but I never really paid attention. And here in this film, I get it. She's the character in this film that is really kind of making everything happen. It's kind of setting everything in motion. And we don't find that out until later, because to start with, this film has a pretty substantial, very signature long take opening. That oneer at the beginning of the film, that is very much a De Palma thing. And he's not the only one that's done it, of course, but while it was happening, it didn't surprise me that that's what I was watching. And so in that first, I don't know, what is it like? It's like a 10-minute scene or something. It goes on for a while. And it's the very first shot of the film. Nicolas Cage is doing it. He's being Nicolas Cage. That's his thing. And it's not annoying. It's not, well, maybe to some people it's annoying. It's big, you know? He's a character who's just chewing it up. And I think that's the idea. As we start to learn about his relationship with Gary Sinise, with that character, you get the sense of like, yeah, he's living it up, this guy. And yet it's charismatic. And you kind of feel like this is the guy that I want to make it through this film. And when you find out he's not actually really, truly the main character in this film, like he's not the one that all this revolves around. He's the one that has to piece some of it together. He's actually kind of the surrogate for us, the viewer, the audience, because we don't know what he doesn't know. And we're finding it out when he finds it out, you know? And so, look, this whole oneer at the beginning of the film, this leads up to this boxing match in a casino. See, I knew there was something about a boxing match in this movie. And during this boxing match, there's, was it like Secretary of Defense or I don't remember. There's some important government official there. And Gary Sinise is there like on a protection detail or something like that. Somebody takes a shot at the guy. And they happen to also hit the character played by Carlo Gugino. Gugino? Let's get it right. I think I need an official answer on what is the pronunciation there. Carlo Gugino? Still though, here in this film, I feel like we're getting the sense that this character that Nicolas Cage is playing, he's trying to stay on top of it, but he's almost always behind it. And by that, I mean, there's an assassination, there's the cover-up, and then there's the, I guess, cleanup to the cover-up, right? It turns out Gary Sinise, his character, is in on the whole thing. It's a whole plot. It's got multiple moving parts on the board. And here's the other thing. Here's the thing that this film reminded me of. And it wasn't until this, honestly, until Snake Eyes, that it really pegged what I feel like De Palma really does best. Because in all of his films, there's a scene, a sequence, a moment where this happens in some way or another, to some degree or another, where he basically just slows down time. And in that slowing of time, he presents us with the same moment, the same instance from alternate perspectives, from multiple angles, from different points of view. And that's tricky because when you're a viewer and you're connected with a character like your protagonist or your lead or whatever you want to say, you don't necessarily want to change perspective because it can be kind of jarring, right? Like, whose eyes am I watching this unfold through? And it's not like he does all of this in one single pass. And I guess this is the film that really spelled it all out, because when we see the boxing match at the beginning, we see it all kind of basically play out through Nicolas Cage's eyes, right? We see him kind of being caught up in all the excitement, just, living it up. And then all of a sudden, there's a problem. And then all of a sudden, the guy's dead. And then all of a sudden, everybody's running, screaming, it's panic. Later in the film, we see the same moment, but from an entirely different perspective. We see it from Gary Sinise's perspective. And then we even see it again from the other character, Carlo Gugino? Carlo Gugino. We'll go with that. I'm just going with it. I like it. Later in the film, we see it from her perspective. And in each of those, it's not like we're just seeing the same thing from another angle. We're learning new information. He's actually worked in plot and character development even every time we see this from another perspective, which is really the only way that it actually makes sense. Like, it actually is useful to do that. If you just showed me the same thing exactly the same way from multiple angles, that doesn't help anything. You're wasting my time, actually. You're showing off. That's all. But the way it works in this film is like, no, every time we see this, something new or something different is shown. And it's not quite the same, but, if you're looking for something that's more recent that kind of does this, I mean, you could look at it even going back to something like Rashomon, of course, but something more recent that not just does this for fun or whatever, but is actually the whole film, the whole story hinges on this, is The Last Duel, I think. I think I saw that right before I started. I don't remember if I ever talked about it. But that's a film that kind of does a similar thing, where we see this same incident that's very crucial to all three of those characters. And we see it happen, we see it play out three different ways. And each time, it's not like we're just seeing the same thing again. We're seeing different subtle changes or shifts in what actually happened based on which character we're seeing it through. And it's important because it does ultimately get us to what the conclusion of the film is, like why it ends up the way it does, because of what we learn every time we take another pass at that moment. And so here in Snake Eyes, I feel like this really does it pretty well. Now, the idea of this film also throwing in that this is all taking place as a hurricane is about to bear down on Atlantic City. I don't know why that's even necessary. I mean, I kind of get it in a way. I think it's kind of mentioned in the film. It gives it a little bit of urgency, I suppose, but it's also, it's unnecessary, really, I think. I talked about that in, what was the film? It was Timothée Chalamet and Micah Monroe. What was that? Hot Summer Nights. I actually really like that film, and I've seen it a couple times since I talked about it. And every time, I like the story, I like the characters, I like the writing in it even. It's kind of smart, and it's got its own flair for being basically like a sort of a coming-of-age / drug crime thriller. It's got something in it, right? And yet every time I've seen it, when we get to the end and there's the damn hurricane coming, I'm like, why? That's not even, it doesn't change anything about these characters, I don't think. It changes the plot of the film, of course, and how things happen, but I don't feel like that. It just really feels like a literal hand of God coming out and saying, hey, wrap this up. Not really a fan, you know? And I get there could be ways that it could work and could be useful and make sense as a backdrop or even as a kind of a crucial point in a film or in a story. But in these, I don't really know that it does that. I don't feel like we really get there. So I don't know. I liked most of this film. I actually did. I really enjoyed watching this film. I enjoyed watching the puzzle pieces come together. And I think that's right where you want to be. That's the pocket you want to be in. It's like you think you know what's about to happen, but then, nope, you didn't. There's something else. And to kind of always be doing that throughout a film or just experiencing a story, that's fun. That's entertaining, at least to me, you know. I feel like that makes it worth my time. And so, look, I'll give this one, I'll call this one a win, okay? The first three, they weren't really doing it for me, but this one, I liked it. And so the last two I want to get to here, Passion from 2015, and let's circle back to Domino in 2019. And I got to say, there's something about these films that I see traces, I see hints of De Palma's style, his moves. It feels very much like, put it this way, it feels like somebody who really loves De Palma's way of making a film made these films, not De Palma himself. And I don't know if that's probably kind of rude to say, but it just feels like something that it feels like it what's a nice way to say this? It feels like the energy is gone. The thrill is gone. Like you could get a sense like the type of story is supposed to be kind of edgy, kind of disturbing, maybe take some bold swings in terms of the subject matter. But the execution really just, it doesn't match up, you know? And just to kind of run through them quickly, I guess, but Passion, it's about these two women. They're in this world of advertising and technology. You know, they're advertising this like a cell phone thing or something like that. And it's Rachel McAdams and it's Noomi Rapace. And I think the acting in this film doesn't work. And it's not because they're bad. Hear me out. I think it's just because if they'd swapped roles, I think then we would have had a film. Just the type of character they were playing, the sort of energy that I think they naturally have, or at least from other films I've seen them in, that would have made sense. And I think it would have worked. And now maybe you could say, well, they were trying to go against type and like, you know, push the boundaries, I guess. But if you've got a strength, use your strength. Don't try and make your weakness work. And for me, I don't see Rachel McAdams as this kind of scheming, domineering boss lady that is so ruthless. And I don't see Noomi Rapace as this sort of green, kind of naive or vulnerable person that can be either taken advantage of or just kind of run over, you know? And I'll tell you, I mean, because that's the way the character, here's the other thing. That's the way those characters start, right? At the beginning of the film, this is kind of the dynamic we establish. They have a working relationship, and then it becomes more than that. And then we're into some very murky territory on like who's got power where. It's a very questionable dynamic now. And then there's this murder that happens, and then we're supposed to understand that maybe there's some change, right? This character isn't who we thought she was. But then, at the very end, there's another reveal. And I got to tell you, I mean, it is pretty clumsy. It just kind of falls out. It doesn't really splash, It's funny that it shouldn't be something to get hung up on, but I feel like anytime you make a movie that involves some sort of contemporary technology, something that it's so easy for it to get stuck in time then. And look, this even happened with De Palma when he did Mission Impossible, right? If you watch the first Mission Impossible movie, there are things in that film, they're talking about like computers and they're talking about the technology with the CIA or whatever, the hacking. Remember, Ving Rhames, his character in that movie is talking about a computer and he can do all this, but he needs this certain thing with this type of chip and the architecture and all that. I'm like, all that technical speak, that was obsolete by the time the movie came out and is definitely obsolete now, right? And you just aged your movie. You just locked it into 1995 or whatever it was. And this film, kind of the same thing. Now, this film is not even 10 years old yet, but I can tell it just feels like it's a movie that we have all moved past, And it's just interesting, though, because it is weird to see a De Palma film with characters like using cell phones and tablets. And I guess to me, traditionally thinking like of a De Palma film, that's 70s, that's 80s, that's even the 90s. And even some of those films were period films, like The Untouchables, Carlito's Way. Maybe the other one that really, really just steps over the line is Scarface. And yet, Scarface not only felt like it was locked in that time, but I actually think it kind of defined that time in a weird way. It owned it, But that doesn't really work most of the time, I think. Most of the time, I think you actually hurt your film by doing too much instead of actually like just kind of letting it be what it is and not get too lost in the sauce of what is current technology and how's it going to look. So the last film here, Domino, 2019, I got to say this one is the one that felt least like a De Palma film. Really. I mean, there's a couple of sequences in the film where you kind of sense it, You got, oh, this feels very De Palma-like. But most of the rest of the film, it's kind of bland. It feels like TV work, And not like high-end premiere level TV shows. And I'll give it this much. It does take a couple of bold swings. The plot of this film, the engine of this thing runs on this threat and this conspiracy sort of thing about terrorism. But it's super convoluted. It's so unclear of who is doing what and what exactly, who they're working for even. You've got this cop, Nikolai Coster-Waldau. He's a Danish cop, and he's looking for the man who killed his partner, right? They're trying to arrest somebody or catch somebody. His partner gets killed. So now he's like out looking for this person, trying to take this down, And then he gets caught up. He catches wind of this whole terrorism plot. And when that comes into play, we get to see some of the De Palma shine through, I think. I mean, there's a really, really kind of disturbing because it feels very realistic. There's this split screen, let's say, well, it's not really split screen. I guess it is technically. It's like a split screen alternate viewpoint terrorist attack on a film festival. And that's not really that's not saying it right. I don't know how else to say it, but it's like this, one of these terrorists goes to a film festival with an assault rifle, and it's got a camera on it facing the crowd, and it's got another camera on it facing her. And those two cameras or phones or whatever they were, they are transmitting this actual attack live, right? Like live streaming this terrorist attack. As you're seeing the woman who's shooting and you're seeing the people that she's shooting at the same time. And the reason I say it feels so realistic is because that's not something that you wouldn't expect to see today, somehow, unfortunately. And then the other side of that, we have this multiple angle bullfighting arena. It's like a drone attack. And we're seeing it from multiple perspectives. We're seeing it through the lens of a sniper or the drone pilot, I guess. And so then it becomes a little bit of like the rear window effect of like you're seeing something that is so far away and you really don't have any ability. You're helpless to change anything. You're just kind of watching what's about to happen to these people at a distance. And it is a weird kind of helplessness you have as the viewer / voyeur, right? Like you want to know what's going to happen, but you also don't because you can't do anything about it. And so, those two moments in the film, I think they at least harken back to what I was saying earlier, is like this fascination with multiple angles and slowing down time, really breaking down a moment into specific beats or very specific actions. But that's really, in this film, Domino, that's really all we get. That's all that it feels like a De Palma film. And, talking about all these films, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's sad. It's not sad. I like that a filmmaker like this has made so many different types of films and tried so many different types of things. I guess it's just unfortunate that they don't always work. But, I guess that's part of it. That's part of the creative process is you try, and that doesn't work. You try something else and you keep trying, and you're just looking to do something interesting, something creative. And that doesn't change anything of how I feel about the other films that I've seen, the other films that I love. And it doesn't change that I would still like to see De Palma do another film. So here's to that. Let's see another. Take big swings. I'm here for it. So, all right, that's it for me for this episode. This has been a long one, I suppose, but I really wanted to get into these films. I really got intrigued by that documentary, and I can't say enough about it. If you haven't seen it, the documentary about De Palma, called De Palma, it's not only interesting to see his perspective and kind of looking back at making some of these films, but also just to revisit them and what they were, and even here to find some new ones that I just really didn't have any awareness of. Now, there are a couple of other films I still want to see of his that I didn't get to, and I'll get to them someday. Body Double, I still want to see. Bonfire of the Vanities, I still want to see. I know, I heard the words, but we'll get to those some other day. In the meantime, hey, thanks for checking us out. If you're a De Palma fan and I'm wrong about some of this, let me know what I miss. If not, if you've only heard of a couple of De Palma films, I would say go for the ones you've heard of more. Maybe get to these later on down the road if you feel like it. Snake Eyes, I'll give it to this. Snake Eyes, not bad. Maybe check that one out. All right, that's it for me. I'm out of here. Go to filmstreak.com. You can find other episodes. You can subscribe, of course, with all the podcast things. You can even sign up to get a new episode by email if you prefer that. You don't do a podcast app or whatever. I also have a list of all of these films on IMDb where I'm keeping track of them. You can add them to your own list. You make your own list on IMDb of films you want to watch. That's how I got into this whole thing. I started a watch list, and now I'm up to like 1,400 films. What the hell's wrong with me? Anyway, here I go. Going to stay dry because it's raining for like the 5th day in a row. And you go watch something new.